All right, everyone. It is 2 o'clock, so I will go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon. I am Taylor Post, Swiftland's office manager, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, How to Handle That Dreaded Discipline Problem, and today's presenter, Linda Bruno. Linda has been developing and conducting training workshops for libraries and other organizations for more than 15 years. She offers workshops on topics ranging from leadership skills to returning balance and lots of areas in between. Linda received her MBA from the University of Florida and has years of experience in hands-on management positions. She develops her workshops based on solid research and, more importantly, real-life application. Please welcome Linda Bruno and enjoy her webinar this afternoon. Linda?
Thanks so much, Taylor. Welcome everybody to today's session from all parts of rainy Florida, I think. The rain hasn't started here, but the thunder has. So we'll all enjoy that together, I guess. I want to just do a little disclaimer here up front that this is one of those topics that I push pretty hard on because it's just such a challenge for all of us. And how do I know that? Because I had to deal with it myself when I was a manager. And I'm going to tell you right now that I never got used to it from the standpoint of, oh, well, I just have to discipline somebody today. It was never like that for me. I was always a little bit anxious, a little bit nervous. Sometimes my stomach was churning depending on who it was and what the issue was. But here's the other part of that equation. I do know for a fact that although it never got easier, I got stronger when I did what I knew I needed to do. And that's what I want to encourage you about today because you will get stronger. And I would hope that nobody in the room would ever get to the point where they get up in the morning and say, oh boy, I get to go discipline somebody today. That's not our goal, is it? But it's a goal of getting up in the morning and thinking, okay, I need to handle that issue today and make sure everything's going okay. So the first thing I want to ask you is, why do you think it's important to handle the dreaded discipline problem? Because so often many of us have experienced situations where they never got handled. So why bother? Why do you think that's important in your environment? There are no right or wrong answers, but why is it important to you? Why did you choose to come today based on the topic? So that it doesn't get worse. Absolutely. Staff morale. Avoid chaos and escalating. It affects all staff. Nip it in the bud. All of the above, right? So it doesn't escalate. Yes, you're exactly right. And I'm going to pick out the one that I think really, yes, Brandon, discipline and document. That's one, and I didn't even pay Brandon to say that, but that's one of the things we're going to talk about today is actually documenting it to improve your team. Doing nothing encourages more, Brian, you're absolutely right. And all of the things that you all mentioned is that effect that it has on morale. And I think that that is one of those things that's easy to overlook. It's easy to sweep under the rug that we're just going to ignore the fact, well, everybody, I've had people say this to me, well, everybody knows how John is or whomever. And I think that doesn't mean that they feel okay about how John's behaving. So we're going to talk about that in depth today. Can I give you a magic wand? No, I cannot. I don't have that silver bullet. I don't have a way to fix the situation for you, but I know that these things work because I've used them. I will also tell you that I've done a lot of reading on this, and you will find this with this webinar as well, that what we think might happen doesn't necessarily mean that's what will happen when we're in the midst of actually handling the problem. Because guess what? The other person involved is a human being. And we really don't know how they'll react, do we? Or what excuses they might give or whatever it might be. Brad said in a situation here, the buck got passed to me and I had to deal with it. It was much harder because past supervisors had not dealt with it. That is so true, Brad. I was in a training a long time ago before I started dealing exclusively with libraries, and it was for Whirlpool Corporation. And I was doing a lot of training with their supervisors. I've been with them for over a year doing different topics and so forth. And I came in, it was an evening session. I came in one night and I could tell they were all just frustrated. And I said, okay, guys, what's going on? And they said, it's Richard again. And I'm making that name up. What's wrong with Richard? He's doing this out on the line and he's doing this and he's doing this. And so I started into my spiel about needing to take care of the discipline problem. And they laughed at me. And I said, why are you laughing? I know this stuff works. I've used it. And they said, because Richard has a file folder 2 inches thick in the 25 years he's been here. And just like Brad was saying, nobody ever dealt with it and it just got worse. And guess what? What gets rewarded gets repeated. And Richard was being rewarded because there were no consequences. Key point for today. People will keep doing what's working for them if there are no consequences. So we need to make sure that there are consequences, not because we want to be a warden or a mean person or anything like that, but because of all the myriad of reasons that you all put in the chat box. Yes, exactly, Hyacinth. The supervisor that has to deal with it becomes the villain. And you know what's really sad? The people that want it to be dealt with, they'll spout out about why this needs to be dealt with and why aren't you doing this with so and so and why haven't you taken care of this problem? But then when you do it, they feel sorry for that person and you are indeed the villain. But here's the deal. When you're a manager, that's part of the process, isn't it? It's what you have to take onto your shoulders. As Susan said, it's the attitude and it doesn't accept a change, keeps bringing it up, won't give it up. Yes, the task. Yeah, not the person. Exactly. So the first key word we want to look at here today, we need to remember that if there are no consequences, nothing's going to change. So the key word is handle it, right? That's what the title says. We have to handle the dreaded discipline problem. I'm also going to say something else right up front. Please don't try to throw a blanket over it. Maybe some of you have experienced this. I know I have, where everybody knows who's causing the problem, but the memo goes out to everybody. We should do this. We should do that. And everybody knows they're not the ones that are guilty. It's the one person. And because the manager, supervisor, director doesn't want to deal with that person, then everybody gets their a finger shook in their face, don't they? And then morale goes down because they get resentful about that. They're not the ones causing the problem. So those are a couple key points right off the bat. And the other thing I want to mention to you is if you've got your handouts there in front of you, hang on to them, put them someplace where you can go back and refresh yourself on this. I'm hoping nobody has to use this right away, but you're here because you think you're probably going to have to use it at some point. So you also always have access to me. And if you can't find me at that email address, because I'm going to be moving in a few months and I haven't had a chance to set up all the new ones, then go to my website and find me there. Drop me an email if you need to explain something in depth. But when we're talking about this morale issue and all of that, I had a lady send me an email after a program a couple of years ago, and she went into a long explanation about this person that was not following the rules, just chose not to. It was just the way she was going to live her life and do her work, and everybody was getting frustrated. I asked, how is morale? And she said, well, it's going down. And I said, well, do you understand why it's going down? Because they see her getting away with this, and yet you don't expect any of them to do that. So we talked back and forth for a couple days, and I went through some steps with her that I thought would be helpful, and I didn't hear from her for a couple days. And I thought, oh, she's handling this, and I bet she's just full of nerves trying to handle it. No, I got an email back in a couple days that said, I think I just need to let her be her free spirit self. That is a myth. That is a fantasy. You can let her be her free spirit self, but the rest of the department is going to be very resentful. Yeah, exactly, Linda. Wrong. Exactly. And that's all I told her. I didn't even answer that day because my heart kind of hurt for the people that worked with her because that's just not fair, is it? And I have a sense of fairness about me that just didn't strike me. So those are the kinds of things I want you to be aware of. And when I say how to handle, it's a cop out. You're exactly right. How to handle the discipline problem. I have to tell you this story that happened to me just last week. Late last week, somebody left a message on my office phone and it said, this is so and so I'm calling from this institution in California, and I came across your website and I've got a fellow in my office that needs help. And I'm thinking, okay, I have no clue what this person wants. I called them back and I said, okay, first of all, my webinars are private, So this is not something that he can just pop into a webinar to get help. But I said, what kind of help are you talking about? Maybe I can give you resources. And as she was talking, she said, well, he needs time management and organizational skills. I said, has he been with you for a while? No, he's fresh out of school. So I started asking her some questions. She said, well, things like when he says he's going to do something, he just never gets around to doing it. Or when I ask him to have it done by Tuesday at noon and he says he will, and then he doesn't. And I said, you are verging here. And I started laughing because I knew this program was coming up. I said, I actually am going to do a program on this, but I said, you are verging on a discipline problem here. And it got real quiet. Now, I wasn't concerned about stepping on her toes. I wanted to help her, but I knew I'd never hear from her again because I don't have anything really to offer her. But I really felt strongly that she needed to recognize that this was getting real close to a discipline issue, not time management and organizational skills. He was choosing to do something else that he wanted to do instead of getting it turned in. So let's take a look at our handouts and see if we can find a couple of tips that will help every person in the room. They won't be the same tips, and I always tell people you probably won't use them all. You should pay attention to all of them because they're all very pertinent, but let's take a look at it. Think about the fact that when we have discipline problems, sometimes they can be lessened by creating an environment of praise and coaching and constructive feedback. In other words, maybe we never have to get to the discipline, the reprimand, the harsher stuff, because it feels harsh, doesn't it? It will be lessened. I didn't say it would be removed. But look at that. The praise is the wonderful part. That's what you want to get most of. But then sometimes people just aren't getting something and you might need to coach them a bit. And then you need to give them some constructive feedback because maybe the way they're doing it isn't working. And that's all good stuff. That's all the way your ongoing process should be working. But if you're at the constructive feedback phase, and that still isn't working, then you might need to move a little bit more toward what I call corrective counseling. And you can also throw that word coaching in there as well. You could use that interchangeably as far as I'm concerned, because now it's more we've got to correct this. Constructive feedback is just, I think this could be improved and let's take a look at it this way, but corrective means there's an issue here that needs to be taken care of. Linda said sometimes people need a chance to change their mind about what they said or did and still keep self-esteem. Yes, and that's all part of this initial process, isn't it? They can see that things are going off the rails a bit and you can help them get that train back on the track. So it's kind of a progression of sorts, if you think about it. When I think about it, I look at this progression as let's spend most of our time in praising, coaching, and constructive feedback, right? Because look at that. That's where the chunk of our focus is going to be. Now, we all know human beings where for some reason that's just not working for them, and then we go into the corrective counseling. But you see how much smaller that is than that first big segment? Uh-oh, the corrective counseling didn't work. Then we get into reprimands. Again, much, much smaller, but it needs to be dealt with if the corrective counseling hasn't worked. And at the very end, hope this never happens to you. It has happened to me. And it's not fun, but I knew when I was done that it was the right thing to do. And so many times what happens is the person that just decides not to do what you've asked them to do and continues to make those choices, it's really not a good fit for them anyway. So I don't want you to say it's not personal because people always take it personally, don't they? If somebody's telling me they don't want me, then I'm going to take that personally. So I wouldn't want you to say that, but you need to keep in your mind that it truly isn't personal. It's a mismatch between what they want to do and are willing to do and what your organization needs from them. And when you kind of put it in those neutral terms, it's not as threatening to you that way either. So let's look at the corrective coaching or the corrective counseling. Heather, I have no idea what I just said. Let's look at what the shape looks like. I just riff on this stuff because it comes to my mind and I want to share these points with you. Was there a particular word or something that you caught, the last sentence? It had something to do with, and I don't think I've ever even used that phrase before, that when there's an issue and they're choosing not to do what you've asked them to do, then there is a mismatch between what they want to do at their work and what your organization needs. I think that's sort of a recap of what you needed, Heather. But isn't that true? Just think of the word mismatch. Because if you've gone through the praise, coaching, constructive feedback, corrective counseling, reprimand stage, and it's still not working, now we're going to look at some reasons it might not work too, which is very helpful. Because sometimes we truly don't know what's happening behind the scenes, that this isn't quite working the way it should. But if you've done everything you can do all through this process, it may come to the very end where it's a mismatch. And again, don't say, oh, it's not personal, because it will feel personal to them. But if in your heart you know it's not personal and you're doing what's best for everybody, that lifts a bit of that burden, doesn't it? That's why I put the word dreaded in there, because it's a burden and it's okay for it to be a burden. But you can't ignore something and jump right to reprimand either, can you? Because that person's head is spinning, thinking, why didn't you say something before? I had somebody say that to me once. They drew something to my attention, and I just looked at them, and it wasn't really a reprimand, but it felt personal. And I said, if this has been going on and that's not what you wanted, why didn't you say something? So then that creates a rift too, doesn't it? A barrier between us. So let's look at that corrective coaching or corrective counseling, whichever term you want to use. The key word there is corrective. You want to discuss it in private. And the reason I put this here is there are some people that think there's no big deal about just blurting it out in front of other people. Now, if it's an emergency, obviously you're going to do that. But somebody asked me one time, they said, well, what do you do if every time you discuss it in private, people start whispering because they see Joan go into your office or your workspace and they know Joan's going to be in for some corrective coaching? So my thought process is try to find little pockets of time where you can call people in just to see how things are going, so that it isn't an atmosphere of when they're in there talking to you, there must be a problem. Because that does happen, doesn't it? You get called to the principal's office, so to speak. And so if you try to just, and you don't have hours to do this, I understand that. But if you try to just make part of your planning process as a manager, a supervisor, a director, whatever your particular position is, part of that process is for a few minutes every couple of days, I'm going to talk to one of my employees in my workspace just to touch base. What's going well? What do you see that we need to tweak a bit? Those kinds of things. So that when you're having those conversations, it doesn't feel like the sledgehammer is going to come down. It feels more like, okay, there's a bigger issue than we've been talking about, so let's address it. And of course, again, this is not rocket science. Nothing I'm telling you is rocket science. But because we're human and our emotions get involved, it's very easy for us to start to exaggerate. And I'm going to share with you an article that I just got this week from Harvard Business Review. I subscribe, and so I get their digital version as well. And this was just called Today's Tip: Avoid These Mistakes in a Tough Conversation. And one of the things they mentioned was don't exaggerate. Skip statements that start with you always or you never, because they're rarely true. You want to review the facts, don't you? I noticed that on Monday and last Thursday, this is what happened. Not you always do it this way or whatever it might be. So review the facts of the situation. And then you need to be real specific about what needs to change. Is it their behavior? Is it the actions they're taking? Is it performance or productivity? I always suggest to people that keep these handouts, use them as a worksheet when you're getting ready to have the discussion so that you're prepared and things aren't surprising to you as you're having that conversation. Not that they couldn't be if somebody bursts into tears or something like that. That could certainly surprise you, throw you off guard. Another one is get agreement regarding the problem. You've expressed what's going on, and you could say something along the lines of, can you see how that would be an issue for our patrons? Can you see how that would be an issue for our coworkers? Do you understand why I need you to correct this? So you want that agreement so that that person doesn't, in their mind, decide that they heard something different. So get agreement regarding the problem. And of course, you want to allow them time to express their side. Somebody mentioned that. Linda said sometimes people need a chance to change their mind about what they said or did and still keep their self-esteem. And so as you're going through this process and you're talking to them and they have time to express their side, you just have to be real careful and very discerning in that particular step, because what often happens when they're expressing their side is that they're making excuses. So you've got to be careful about that, don't you? You can certainly take in what they're telling you, but be careful that they're not making excuses. Another thing that happens with we human beings is we point the finger at somebody else. Well, yeah, but Deb does it. Taylor does it. Kelly does it. Jose does it. You know, that's not what we're talking about today. Let's figure out how we can make it better for you. So get agreement from them. And then you talk about what are you going to do? What will you do differently? For you to assume, and that's another comment on the Harvard Business Review, and it's just a little checklist. It says, don't assume your perspective is obvious. You know in your head that any logical person would do X, Y, Z when we're done with this conversation. That does not mean that's how they see it. We are so complicated as human beings, and we see life through so many different perspectives that discussing and agreeing on these steps, because the other thing that happens, and I can't remember who said it, document it, all that stuff. The other thing that happens when you're discussing and agreeing on steps, that's now documented. That person can't come back on you and say, well, she didn't say I was supposed to do this. Yeah, that's what we talked about. And so you've got it documented right there. And here's the big one. I know nobody wants to hear this, but you need to be clear about what the consequences will be and have them summarized so that they understand those consequences. Remember, what gets rewarded gets repeated. If they leave you and you think in 2 weeks everything's just gotten so rainbows and unicorns, and then they slide right back into their old routine, what are you going to do about it? If you didn't tell them there were going to be consequences, you have to start the process all over again. Isn't that fun? No, it's not. So be clear about the consequences. And if you do set consequences, you need to make sure you live up to those consequences, that you're willing to institute the consequences. And I know this is the one that makes people squirm. You've probably all been in the grocery store or at Walmart where the toddler is just running amok and mom is saying, I'm going to count to three. I'm going to count to three. And about the ninth time she says that, I'm exaggerating, of course, but after several times, the people around her want to say, do you need some help counting to three? Because the child has learned that that is a baseless threat. Nothing is going to happen. I can just keep running amok, knocking people over in the aisles or running into them or whatever and being dangerous. It's a safety hazard. And yet, mom doesn't want to look like the bad mom and is probably afraid somebody would report her. But I suspect a lot of times the same thing is happening at home when that toddler is doing things that they know they're not supposed to do, but there have never been any consequences. And I'm not talking about being horrible to people. You just, in the workplace, you need to have consequences. So just be aware of that. We're all toddlers in bigger bodies. That's how the human brain works. We get our feelings hurt, we get defensive, we do all of those things. But if you're clear about your part in it, then you have no reason to feel that you've let that person down at the end of the process because you did what you could do. You need to set times for follow-up, because even if things are going wonderfully, that's a great time to call them back in and tell them how wonderful things are. So set those times for follow-up. And as we said earlier, document the discussion. You cannot remember what you said or when you said it. And it gets to be he said, she said, whatever it is, and you have no leg to stand on because it's not documented. And you set the times for follow-up. And like I said, even if things are going very well and you're thinking, whew, I don't have to deal with that anymore. No, go ahead and follow up, because when you follow up, it lets them know you're paying attention. And if you don't follow up, it's easier for them to slide back into bad habits, isn't it? So just those simple steps can really help us feel more secure in the interaction we need to have with that person. Then acknowledge success and celebrate. If they did a good job, let them know. What gets rewarded gets repeated. And I'm not saying that to be manipulative, but if you tell me you love the way I've changed this or that and now things are running so much smoother, I'm a lot less likely to revert back to my old ways, because every human being wants to feel valued and appreciated. And you've now told me my value has gone up in your estimation because I'm doing things that are going to help the organization. That's why I said it's so important to practice and plan when you're having those conversations, if you can. There are times where it's a little more sudden than that, but like I said, that would usually be an emergency. Usually when we call it sudden, it's been boiling for a while and we've been ignoring it. We've been in denial, and that doesn't serve anybody. Number 9 was follow up. 7 was set the times for follow-up, and then no matter what's happening, go ahead and follow up. So you can celebrate, or you can, guide it back on track again if things got a little wonky along the way. So thinking about just corrective coaching, which one do you struggle with the most? Would you type that into the chat box? Which one do you struggle with the most? Do you see the variety in the chat box with just a few people responding? We all struggle with these things. A lot of us are sitting here thinking, why can't they just play nice in the sandbox and do what I ask them to do? I need to remind you that they're human beings. We've all had issues, haven't we? Where we haven't done what we thought we were supposed to be doing or somebody else thought we were supposed to be doing. So you can see there are some things, there are already action steps for you to take. That's why I ask you to type them into the chat box, not so that I can follow you around when we're done, because I cannot, but so that you recognize the areas that you could make improvement. Now, you heard the word improvement, right? I did not say perfection. Do not sacrifice excellence trying to reach perfection, because that's the reason we put things off. Oh my gosh, I forgot that step. Oh my gosh, I didn't do that right. You need to make baby steps here. Some of you have heard me use my analogy of a yardstick, and the beginning of the yardstick is A and the end of the yardstick is Z. And if you came in today and you think you're at an E on how you handle discipline problems, what if we moved you to a K? That would be a significant difference, wouldn't it? I was using that analogy with some other topic once, and somebody said, I'd just be happy if you moved me from E to F. And that'll work too. We're looking for progress, not perfection. Nancy said having to reinforce what we had agreed to improve upon multiple times. Okay, so what are the consequences, Nancy? If it's multiple times, then the consequences need to be reviewed. And do they need to be, I'm going to say harsher, stronger, more stringent? Susan, number 7 was set times for follow-up. See, there's a difference. Number 8 is document. Number 9 is follow up, because here's what happens. It falls apart right there. Number 7 was set times for follow-up, and then when things get a little bit better, we retreat because we don't want to handle this anymore. And we need to not retreat. Whether it was successful or not, we need to not retreat, because that person needs to understand this is something that's important enough to me that I'm going to follow up on it. So setting the date isn't going to do us any good if we then just kind of go, oh, good, I don't have to handle this anymore because it got a little bit better. So that was the reason behind that duplication, if you will. So let's look at the middle of page 2. Okay, Nancy, yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning the union issue. I know that's an issue. Progressive discipline, that's good. I would say don't back off of it just because it's so annoying that you have to do this multiple times, because when you back off, it then seems to grow. because they know they have you where they want you sometimes. And not all employees are like that. Not even all employees that need discipline are like that. But there are a few that have decided that they don't like the way things are run and they are going to push as hard as they can push. So, another suggestion is for you all, and I know this isn't going to solve it either all the time, but sometimes you need to take it to the person higher up than you and say, here is exactly, and that's why it's so important to document and do all these steps, because you can then show them, here's what I've done so far. This isn't working. Morale is going down, productivity is going down, enthusiasm is going down, serving our patrons is going down. What should my next step be? And ask them that. I had somebody tell me the other day that they were working with somebody that had been passed around from department to department to department because nobody wanted to deal with them. And that person is getting rewarded. They're not really concerned they're getting passed around. They still have a paycheck every week or every 2 weeks or however often, but nothing's happening. So as much as you can, and then Nancy, just keep using these techniques. I don't mean it to sound this way, and I know this is going to sound so cruel, but sometimes if you just keep reiterating that you're not happy with performance, they don't want to hear it anymore and they find another job. Because truly, if that's the case, it really is a mismatch, isn't it? Maybe even opening a conversation somewhere in the midst of this that totally throws them, and you just look them straight in the eye and you say, help me understand why you've chosen not to do what I asked. Yikes. Help me understand why you've chosen to not to do what I've asked. And then here's the tough part. Zip it. Don't say anything. You will be uncomfortable, I promise. But hopefully they will be as well. And there is that rare chance that they might actually give you some insight as to what's going on with them and why they're behaving that way. Doesn't happen as often as we would like, but it does happen. And let's look at the middle of page 2 if you've got your handouts there. And the reason I've got that there is because it lists a whole bunch of different areas that they could be struggling with. And I didn't put them on slides because it's just a bunch of text, so I didn't put it on there. But I'll give you the main categories and just highlight a few in case you didn't print out your handouts. But it just is called 21 Possible Causes for Poor Performance. And it's a checklist for you to think about as you're preparing your discussion. The first category is organizational causes. What's happening with the organization? Is it the management climate? Is it a union? That's not even on the list, but organizational conflict that seems to be ongoing. Policies and procedures. If it's policies and procedures, are they outdated? Does that need to be reviewed? Inadequate training would be an organizational issue. There you go, Nancy. You're taking those progressive steps. You know, here's the thing, Nancy. I want you to hear this clearly. People see you taking those steps, and they know that your hands are tied to be more pointed about the discipline because of your environment. They respect you for going ahead and taking those steps because even those aren't comfortable, even though you're not moving as fast as you would like. So the morale doesn't go down as much when you're in that kind of an environment because they know there's not a lot you can do about it. So please understand that there are a lot of people in your work environment that probably admire you for taking those steps, even though they may not be resulting the way you want them to. So the first category is organizational causes. The next category is external causes. And I'm going to spend a minute here. Oh my goodness. Everybody comes in to work every day with a big bag of stuff on their back, don't they? You do. I do. It might be, I'm going to read these for you. Family problems. Just type yes if you personally have ever had any family problems. You know, an argument, a disagreement, things just aren't going well. Yeah, I think most of the people in the room anyway, right? And it affects, first of all, they're at differing degrees, aren't they? Family problems can be differing degrees. And it affects us at different levels. Even when I observe you and I think, well, that's not a big deal. You had a bit of a disagreement with your sister. But if you've been best friends with your sister and you've never had a disagreement, this is hurting you. And that's what you bring to work. And so maybe your work isn't quite as productive. Now, I want to be very, very clear, and I've already mentioned this once. Do not allow these things to become excuses. That's when you start to sense, and you will, that they're becoming excuses. That's when you back off a bit and you just look them in the eye and you say, what can I do to help you through this so that you can get back on track? You let them know you're paying attention to their job performance. But there are people that will use whatever as an excuse. A lady worked for me once, and she was actually good with our customers on the phone, but she would never do what we asked her to do. When I say we, I was the supervisor, but her coworkers needed things from her as well. She would, we were on a rotating system for our phones, and she would come back from lunch late every day, or she would get to work late. Then there was nobody there to answer the phone or whatever. I even bought her a clock out of my own money because she told me she didn't have a watch and there was no way for her to tell whether she was on time or not. I bought her a clock for her desk so she could leave on time and all that kind of stuff. And it just never got better. And she came in one day, we'd had a discussion the week before, and she came in one day all flustered and she said, I'm so sorry, but the train was going down the track beside my house and I couldn't cross the tracks. And I looked at her and I said, so how long have you lived there? And she said, 8 years. Yes, Susan, thank you. We're going to address that in a moment. I said, how long has the train traveled that track? And her face got red. And I wasn't being mean and I wasn't being hateful and I wasn't even being loud. I was just calling her out on her excuses. So we need to be careful not to let these things become excuses. Yes, exactly, Susan. We do not want to offer to help with their personal problems. We cannot solve those personal problems. They need to come up with a solution. And that's absolutely right. And I said to her, what are you going to do to be on time? So you're right, Susan. I bought the alarm clock just thinking that, maybe on the off chance. And I was young and naive and really, really thought everybody had good intent. Some of us have figured out that that's not the case, right? Yeah, Yvonne. Is it a bad day or is it a bad life? And either way, what are you going to do about it? Because you have a choice, don't you? So we have to make those choices and decide for ourselves because at this point, you are creating a problem with your job. And I'm pretty sure that a lack of a paycheck is not going to make things better for you. So absolutely. So under external causes, we talked about family problems, and that today is so much bigger than it used to be because there are people that have mental challenges. There are people that have addictions. There are people that just have all kinds of things going on that we know that can affect their performance, and we want to be understanding, truly. But at some point, we do have to move through that and figure out a way that we can still make work productive. Under personal problems, I had health, finances, drugs, legal issues, divorce, whatever it might be. Some of you know my husband suffered from cancer, and when he got through that and the treatments were effective, then the treatments themselves caused debilitating side effects. And that was going on for 11 years. And there were times, I'm pretty sure I probably wasn't the responsive, kind, wonderful person that I try to be because that was my best friend's life we were talking about. So we do need to be understanding. There were other times where I thought, you know what, I just need to go do this work because that's what I've committed to doing. So those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. Social values. I was talking to somebody the other day, and the lady that called from California, I said, well, I think it's important to recognize that the life in academia, as far as what the students are expected to do, is a lot different than it used to be. And this person might be used to turning in late work and doing extra credit to make up for it or whatever. And she said, yeah, you're right. And so that's part of it, isn't it? Social values, those have changed. Labor market conditions. If there are lots of jobs out there for them to get, they feel like they can push the envelope, don't they? And then it's your job to let them know your envelope is not available for pushing because you want to make sure that you're doing what you need to do for the organization. It might be governmental action of some sort where you have certain, like you said, union or certain rules or progression and those kinds of things. And I guess I did have union on here. I just happened to have it under external causes. So then we go down to the third category, which is internal causes. And the first one is lack of motivation. You cannot motivate them. You can help create a motivating environment with the praise and coaching and having fun at work and all those kinds of things. But lasting motivation is only internal. Maybe you can do the employee assistance program. Maybe you can get them some kind of professional counseling that will help them deal with that. Sometimes it's laziness. There are some people, I can remember being in a group once and I said, so why do you work at the library? Because normally I get these wonderful warm and fuzzies when I ask that question. And one guy just looked me in the eye and he said, I want the paycheck. And I said, that's very honest. Thank you for sharing that. And I meant it. On the other hand, if that's the attitude he brings to work every day, there's a chance that job may not last forever for him because it isn't a good fit at that point. So laziness, the value system, personality clashes. Oh my gosh, we could do another hour just on personality clashes because some of you have heard me talk about the 4 personalities that I teach on, which are popular, powerful, perfect, and peaceful. And you can hear by those 4 words, folks, that there's going to be a difference in perspective. I'm a powerful. When I'm interacting with a strong, peaceful, I have to calm myself down because I'm a get it done kind of person. And the peaceful is just, let's just get along and everybody's fine. And I admire that, but that's not who I am. If you've got the popular who loves to have fun and you've got the perfect who wants to make sure we're following all the rules and getting all the details right, they're going to frustrate each other. So sometimes it's a matter of recognizing that there might be a personality clash and you're not going to change people's personality. You shouldn't try. But we can certainly help them interact in a different way, can't we? Sometimes it's simple jobs dissatisfaction. Do they need additional training or is it a bad fit? Talk to them about it. I've noticed that this is happening. Help me understand what's going on. Well, I don't know how to do this. Nobody ever showed me. Okay, let's get you some training. And then you set the dates for follow-up, you document it, you follow up with that, don't you? Maybe it's just not a good fit. Are you unhappy here? Help me understand why you're unhappy with your job. Maybe there's something we could do, but maybe it's just not a good fit. Again, I want to be real clear that I can't think of much I've said so far that is actually comfortable, that actually feels good when you say it, except the celebrate success part and the praise and all that stuff that we talked about at the very beginning. But when we're talking about discipline, it's tough. Nobody wants to hurt anybody's feelings. Nobody wants to step on toes. That's true. And it's human. And I'm glad. I'm glad we're that way. On the other hand, we do sometimes have to step up, don't we? So the next one under internal causes is just a failure to understand the job. Do they even know why their job is important? Sometimes it might feel like make busy work, like you didn't really need to do this, but you needed to fill some time kind of a thing. Here's one that's tough. Maybe there's simply a lack of ability. If you gave me something with Excel, I don't know how to do Excel. I could get some training, but because I'm not interested, my ability to do Excel is not going to be as highly tuned, if you will, as somebody else who has had Excel in training and they've also just glommed onto it because it's a natural fit. So sometimes it's lack of ability and we need to acknowledge that. Is there someplace else that would work out better for that person? Many, many years ago, I was working in the state of Louisiana and I left and moved back to Ohio. We had hired my replacement and the plant manager called and he said, Linda, the work isn't getting done. And I'm just a nose to the grindstone kind of person. So I always made sure payroll was done by Thursday, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, so is this person a good worker other than it's not getting done when you think it needs to be done? Oh, absolutely. Always here on time, always pleasant, doing the work well. It's just not getting done. I said, hire help. Because the ability was there, but not the speed ability to get it done. There may be an internal cause, maybe poor attendance, and so they're not there when they need to be there, and that's why the job is falling apart. And so that then becomes an additional discipline issue, doesn't it? Is the poor attendance real? I had a lady once I was doing a performance review with, And I had talked to her about her attendance because she was out 2 hours this day and a half a day later in the week and a day the following week. And she might go one whole week out of a month with no time missing. But when I looked back at her attendance record and we needed people there on the phone, there was rarely a day where she didn't miss at least a couple of hours or an hour. And so when we got ready for the review, because we had already talked about it once, I went ahead and made a little chart. And on her chart, it was a calendar chart, I put a little dot if she only missed an hour or two. I drew a line halfway through it if she missed a half a day. I drew a great big red X through it if she missed the whole day. Everything was in red. Yes, it felt discipline-ish. I meant it to. So when she came in, we talked about some of the other things on her performance review because she and I got along fine. But I said, we've talked about the attendance thing. Yeah, I'm doing better. I held up the sheet, and I am not joking with you when I tell you her mouth dropped open. And she said, I had no idea. In her mind, it seemed like she was at work a lot. So it didn't seem like it was a big issue. But I needed to call that to her attendance, the poor attendance, or to her attention, because it was poor attendance and it was affecting morale. Because guess what? If all 16 people took an hour or two, a couple days a week, or a half a day here and there, or another day here and there, besides vacation and personal days off and holidays, we would have a major issue of not being able to handle our work. So think about that. Sometimes the poor performance might even be previous experiences, how they've been dealt with in the past. And some of you touched on that. Yes, Heather, failure to understand the job is going to require a different, more of a coaching, counseling kind of conversation before you ever get to a discipline issue. Because if it's a true failure to understand the job, then you need to ask some open-ended questions, don't you, Heather? Like, what parts of the job confuse you? Help me understand where you're getting stuck. Do you feel like you need additional training somewhere? Where would that be? Failure to accept after understanding. I'm not sure what that means, Heather. If they understand it and they choose not to do it, that is a discipline issue. And you can open that conversation by saying, we've had the discussion and you understand it, right? Yes, but you've chosen not to do it. And then you get quiet. And you realize that this is the job I'm asking you to do. And if you choose not to do your job, that's a disciplinary issue, right? And that's where it moves into the uncomfortable territory, isn't it? I'm great with helping people understand things. But then when they understand it and they still choose not to do it, remember the free spirit lady? She understood her job. She just didn't want to do it. That does become the discipline issue. And of course, everything I'm saying today should be followed along with your HR policies. And some of you are sitting here thinking, with our HR policies, none of this stuff's going to apply. But I think there are probably at least a few things in here, a few comments in here, a few perspectives in here that will help you today. So, and again, you do have my email address if you want to type me a longer explanation. I know it's hard to do in the chat, and some of you don't want to put it in the chat. Type me what you want to type me, and I will give you that objective viewpoint. And if it is helpful, then you use it. And if it's not, you delete it, and I'll never know. Hyacinth said, what about a feeling over being overqualified yet does not understand the job requirements? Okay, Hyacinth, kind of hard to be specific about that without me knowing that person. But if they've told you they feel they're overqualified, then I think that deserves a discussion about a mismatched job. If they can move into a job where they feel qualified for it, that's one thing. But if they've been hired for a job where they think they're overqualified, you can't underqualify them, can you? You can't pull back on their qualifications. Now, I would say that have the discussion and say, okay, this is your current job responsibility. This is what you were hired for, right? And you get agreement on that. And you say, what do you think we can do within your job to give you some challenges to make you feel better about the work you're doing? I can't promise I can do that, but let's talk about it and see if there are some challenges. Sometimes it's not, they think they're overqualified as much. If you hire me, I'm going to want productive work to do all the time. I remember I worked part-time at Macy's in Atlanta when I lived there, and I drove my supervisor crazy. It was during the Christmas season, and I would come in and I'd say, I need something to do. And she finally said, well, you aren't going to like this, but you can go upstairs in the attic and sort out things that need to be returned. I said, great. I just wanted something to do. So open that up and find out why they think they're overqualified, what they would like to be doing. And if they say, I want to be in your job in a year, and you say, I'm not planning on going anywhere, so maybe this isn't a good match for you, what do you think our alternatives are? Do you see some assertiveness coming out here, folks? You got to stand strong. You don't have to be rude. You don't have to be aggressive. You don't have to be in their face. But you do need to stand strong, because what your job is to make sure the employees are doing the things that are going to benefit your organization. That's your job. And if it's not working and they're choosing not to do that, then that's their choice. Don't forget that. If they're making choices that are just flying in the face of your instructions, that's a choice they made. That's nothing you did wrong. That's a choice. And they've chosen to possibly terminate themselves. That may not be the way they see it, but when you keep making choices and you're not doing what I ask you to do, you indeed have made the choice to terminate yourself. So, what you're going to notice about the next part is that it's very similar to the previous ones, except that now there's an increase in severity. And I did that intentionally because a lot of the things we talked about early on are guiding kinds of principles, aren't they? But now we're getting into the point where it's serious, because we've taken those steps, we've documented, we got agreement, we have action plans, and it's not happening. So it's very obvious to them and you now that we are in reprimand territory. So of course you're still going to do it immediately, and you're still going to do it privately. And here's the immediately part. The reason I put that in there is we put this stuff off as long as we can. And it sort of loses its impetus, if you will. And then it's not as effective when we finally do it, because they may not even remember it. If this is their normal mode of doing things, they may not even remember it. Be consistent. If you are going to reprimand one person for bad attendance, make sure there's not somebody else that's doing just as bad, because people don't respond to that. And it'll be people that aren't even connected to the whole situation that get frustrated by that because they see inconsistency. Reinforce the desired behavior. You heard what I said. What gets rewarded gets repeated, so let them know when you see that it is happening that way. And minimize any attention. In other words, don't give them a lot of attention when they're continuing to do the bad stuff, because we talk about that all the time when we're talking about raising children. They do a lot of the bad stuff just to get your attention. And remember, children in big bodies. 1 and 2, number 1 was immediately and privately, and 2 was consistent. So minimize attention to the bad stuff because they already know what the progression is going to be. Be fair. It goes along with being consistent, but you don't want to bend the rules for one person. You're not being fair to everybody if you're allowing one person to get away with things. So kind of keep that in mind. You're welcome, Samantha. Be specific. We talked about this before. It has to be very pointed because they will swear that's not what they understood. And this is why I tell you to practice and plan. Use a calm voice. Very difficult. But if you can practice and plan, it's easier to draw the discussion back to what you were originally talking about. Use a calm voice. You've heard this before. Say what you mean and mean what you say. You've heard that probably all of your life. Number 5 was fair. Say what you mean and mean what you say. If you tell them there are going to be consequences, follow up. If you tell them you're going to follow up, follow up. If you tell them you want them to report back to you, they need to report back to you, whatever it might be. And of course we know this, but sometimes it can get personal, can it? You're reprimanding their performance, not the person. One of the other things in the Harvard Business Review article said, don't challenge someone's character or integrity. And their comment to that was, you'll make them feel defensive if you tell them they're unprofessional, wrong, or unethical. And also don't tell them what they should do. Remember a lot of those leading questions I've been explaining to you as we go along? That's what they're talking about here. You might consider would be a comment you could make. You could say, help me understand. Have you thought of this? One possibility is, and then they don't feel like you're shaking your finger at them. It's just called avoid these mistakes in a tough conversation. If you look up Harvard Business Review, if you have access to that, and it's under their today's tip, and I'm sorry I didn't write the date down. It's been in the last few days because I kept it in my email box. But Harvard Business Review, avoid these mistakes in a tough conversation, and it'll be one of the briefest things you've read in a long time, but very pointed, just like today's webinar. Yvonne said, it can get awkward when you're now the manager and used to be a coworker friend. It can be, but you got to get over that, don't you? Yeah, they're going to take it personally. And you can say, I know this feels like I'm not behaving like a friend or a coworker, but this is the job I need to do. So help me understand what I can do to make it easier for you. So reprimand poor performance, not the person. Identify what needs to change, just like we talked about earlier. I told you that some of these are repeats because the severity is getting more harsh. Not harsh, but yeah, more severe. Then on this one, let them tell you what they're going to do to change. You've talked about it. You've developed action steps. It isn't happening. So now it's their turn to tell you what they're going to do to change. And you can recap. You know, we had the discussion in March. We touched base again in April. It seemed like you were making some improvement. Here's what you committed to doing. I haven't seen you doing that. So what are you going to do to change? Because if it doesn't change, here are the consequences. And not just a vague, at some point I'm going to have to let you go. No, is that July 1st or is it 2 years from now? So let them tell you what they're going to do to change. Then you talk about those steps again, but this is where the severity really gets clear. And you have to look them in the eye, and you have to have written down that you do realize that this is what's going to happen if things don't improve. And I've even had people sign it before. That's uncomfortable. But we've just gotten into a society where we aren't as willing to take personal accountability. And so I think that might be important. Only you need to be discerning. So you're going to do the same thing you did before. You're going to set those times for follow-up, only now it's at the point where something drastic might have to happen. You document it, and you document it even more than you documented your other discussions. And then you do follow up with them. And if it has worked, good for you. Celebrate that. Thank them. Say, I knew you could do this, and I'm so glad you were willing to step up to the plate like I knew you could. But celebrate it. And if it didn't, you have to be ready for the consequences, don't you? It's critical. So it's up to you now to decide what you're going to do differently in the areas of coaching and counseling and reprimands. What's one key point that struck you today? Would you type that? What's something you either need to stop doing, start doing, or continue doing based on what we've talked about today? Just type that into the chat box so you have a sort of personal responsibility typed right into the chat box. Yeah, coaching can keep you away from some of that other nasty stuff, can it, Noemi? More praise, more coaching. Yeah. I like that. Continue praising, corrective counseling, reinforce desired behaviors. Stop. Thank you, Mary. Stop putting off the conversations. Have them immediately. Because we can do all that other stuff that everybody's typing, and I'm glad you're going to do that. But there are times it doesn't work. And so we've got to be willing to stop putting the conversation off. Reinforcement, giving the person space to discuss and say what they would do. That's hard though, isn't it, Gregory? Because you know what should be done. At least if you're anything like me, I just want to tell them, you know what you're supposed to do, now go do it. That's kind of what I want to do, but it doesn't work that way. And Nancy said, use terms that are not finger pointing. Yes. Corrective counseling, continue doing follow up, and offer praise when success results. And Hyacinth, I'm going to tack onto that, be willing to take the next step if it doesn't, right? Because we all want to live in that first space that I showed you of that, whatever that is, an isosceles triangle or whatever it was there at the first. But sometimes somebody leaks into those other spaces. Yep, Heidi, I think that's so important. Discuss what they'll do to change. And sometimes, if you can, let them make that decision because there's more investment in it. They're more engaged. They're more willing to put forth the effort if they made the decision. You can't always. Angel, it was called Avoid These Mistakes in a Tough Conversation. And it's just called Today's Tips from Harvard Business Review. In just the last few days, it came in my email, and I didn't write the date down. I'm sorry. So Harvard Business Review, today's tip: avoid these mistakes in a tough conversation. And like I said, it's very brief, and some of it's similar to what we talked about today. More follow-up: avoid throwing a blanket. Thank you, Erica, because that's so frustrating for people, isn't it? Thank you all for participating today. I heard wheels turning. I'm not with you, but I heard wheels turning today. So I hope you'll use these tips, and not just once. They may not work the first time or the second time, but if people see you being consistent in how you're handling discipline problems, they will pay attention too. So I wish you the very best with this. You know you have my email address. If you need me for anything, drop me an email. I'm always happy to respond. Thanks, everybody. Have a dry rest of your day.
Thank you, Linda, for an informative webinar this afternoon. If you enjoyed this webinar, we do ask that you join us on July 7th for Don't Put It Off, Let's Talk About Procrastination. As always, we encourage you to keep an eye on our Swiftland CE calendar, the Swiftland Facebook page, or your message from the listserv. Thank you everyone for attending, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Deb.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Taylor.
Linda.
Thanks, Deb. Thank you both.